Hello everybody, this is Neil, and today we will be playing Kerbal Space Program. To start us off today, I'm going to do a brief overview of the game for those of you who maybe are not familiar with it or have never played or don't have it. Of course, if you don't have it, you should be buying it right now. Really, download the demo or buy the game. It is worth it. Turn this video off, go to www.kerbalspaceprogram.com and buy it, or download the demo, or it is also available on Steam. Kerbal Space Program is a game where you fly these little green men that you see on my screen here into space, and you manage their space program. You can design and build rockets and fly missions. It is in a fictional solar system that is somewhat based on ours. And yeah, that's it. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get in. We'll start game, and I'm going to go ahead and open my tutorial save, which has nothing in it so far, and we will do a brief overview before jumping right in. So when you go in and start a new game, you'll see this screen here. You have numerous buildings available to you. This is your space center, your home away from home. So you have a few buildings here that each of them has their purpose. This building here, this is the vehicle assembly building. You go in it, this is where you can build your rockets. We also have this building over here, which is close to us right now, research and development. This is for career mode. We are in sandbox mode right now. In career mode, you can earn science points to unlock the tech tree, and that's what this building is for. This building is where we can hire our astronauts for our space program. So let's go ahead and fill up our roster. And so now we have a full roster of astronauts. This building over here is the space plane hangar. It is in here that we can build airplanes. So that is something that we're not going to touch on at the moment. That's a little bit more advanced. It's better to start off with rockets, but just showing you everything we have in the game. If we go over here, this is the tracking station. This is extremely important. It will show you all of our flights that are in progress. As you see, we have none. But eventually this gets filled up pretty quickly. And you can also look at the solar system. So here's our planet, Kerbin, which is the Earth analog. So you can see Kerbin's moon, which they call Mun, or Moon, depending on how you want to pronounce it, but it's M-U-N in the game. And there's a second moon called Minmus, which is like a captured asteroid, which is circling around out here. You can, of course, travel to these places and land on them, do whatever you want, plant flags, blah, blah, blah. As you can see, Minmus is actually at an inclination to the equator, so which makes it a little bit more complicated to get there. And if we keep zooming out, we see, so there's Kerbin, and it goes around this orbit, and we have a full solar system here. So we'll go quickly through everything we have in the game before jumping right in and playing. So we'll start off, this is the closest planet to the sun, called Moho. Moho is something like a Mercury analog. It is probably the hardest destination to arrive at in this game because A, it's pretty far, and B, again, if you look here, I can't really see, but it's in a very eccentric orbit, and it's also extremely inclined to use, so it takes a huge amount of fuel to get there. It's not that hard to land on, but getting a spacecraft over there is not easy. Our next planet out is called Eve. Eve is a Venus analog here. It's purple. As you can see, it has a lot of liquid on the surface. It has an atmosphere, a very, very thick atmosphere, and very high gravity. It's quite easy to get to, quite easy to land on. It is nearly impossible to take off from. So most times, if you send something here, that is going to be a one-way mission. I have never successfully done a return mission from Eve. It is, I think, the only celestial body in the game I have not done a return mission from. And, no, Tylo also, which you'll see later. But it is extremely, extremely, extremely hard to take off from. Eve also has its own moon called Gilly, which is, I think, the smallest celestial object in the game. It has almost no gravity. It's also in a very eccentric and inclined orbit, so it's a little weird to try to find it. and to try to get to it. But once you get there, it's really easy to land on and take back off from. So that is our second planet in the system. Of course, the third planet, as we saw before, is Kerbin and its moons. Fourth planet is Duna. Duna is the Mars analog of this game. As you can see, it looks like Mars. It also has a very thin atmosphere, but you can use parachutes and things like that to try to land, but you need a lot of them and probably some engine thrust as well, because it is again, very thin. And it's about a third of Kerbin's gravity. It also has its own moon, Ike. Ike is actually one of the larger moons in the game, which is different from the real Mars, of course, because the real Mars has two moons, both of which are very tiny. So this is a larger moon, and the interesting thing about Ike is that it's in what's called a geostationary orbit over Duna, meaning that it stays over the same spot on Duna all the time. Its orbit is in sync with the rotation of the planet. So that's kind of an interesting situation. And as we go further out, we have Dres. Dres is basically an asteroid. So it is also in a slightly inclined and elliptic orbit, but it is not too hard to get to. Not really much interesting going on here, but it is fun to fly there sometimes. There's Dres. The next planet out, this is really interesting, this is Jool. Jool is the Jupiter analog of this game. It's a gas giant. It's huge. As a matter of fact, as far as size, this game is scaled at about a tenth, more or less, of actual sizes in our solar system. So Jool here is actually the size of the real Earth, so it's quite big. And it has 5 moons going around it. Lathe, which, as you can see, is mostly water. It also has an oxygen atmosphere, which is pretty interesting because you can use jet engines there, which is nice, but it's kind of inconvenient to try to land or take off from because it's hard to get to a place where you have flat enough land to land. Most of this is water. So, you know, that's that, but it's definitely an interesting place to visit. The next one out is Val. Val is kind of an icy moon, as you can see here. It's probably like an analog to, I don't know, Europa or something like that. I'm not really sure. But, you know, these are kind of simulating the Galilean moons of Jupiter. So another moon you can land on here. Next one out is Tylo. Now, Tylo is probably the hardest body to land on. It's about 80% of Kerbin's gravity, but it has no atmosphere, meaning you cannot use air to help you slow down. So that's huge. You need a lot of fuel to land. I have never landed here, I don't think. I've been here, but I don't think I've landed. So this and Eve are kind of my to-do list, so to speak. Next one out, we have Bop. Bop is just a little moon like this, and as you can see, it's very inclined to everything else. You see that? It's somewhat elliptic as well. So another interesting place to visit. And finally, Paul, which it's actually called back because it looks like a little piece of pollen. It's also very small, very low gravity, and as you can see, somewhat eccentric and inclined orbit. So Jool is definitely interesting because if you go out to Jool, you have a lot of places you can visit. And finally, Eeloo. Now Eeloo, as I said before, I called Val the Europa analog, but Eeloo really looks like Europa. Right now, it almost is like a Pluto analog, however, that it is, as you can see, its orbit goes way out, past everything else, but at its closest point, it actually goes in past Jool. And they're actually in a 3-to-2 resonance, which means that every time Jool makes 3 orbits, Eeloo makes 2. And that is the same situation that you have in the real solar system between Neptune and Pluto. That is the same thing. If some of you remember, there was a period for a while where Pluto was actually closer to the Sun than Neptune. So those are all of the planets in the game. There's a lot to do. You can visit all of them. So that's kind of what we have here. And the final building to check out before we go right into some rockets is, of course, we have the launch pad. And if you click on the launch pad, it will bring up this dialogue here, and you can select a rocket. These are the ones that came with the game, but we're going to actually build one later. But I'm just going to select something so you can see what the launch pad looks like. If you pick something with a cockpit or a capsule, you can of course select which crew members you want to fly a mission. And once you've done all that, you click on this button here, launch, and you go out to the launch pad. So here we are on the launch pad with the little satellite and whatever. We're not going to actually launch this because we're going to design and build our own rocket, but as you can see, it's a nice looking launch pad. This was actually redone a couple of versions ago. It used to have this ugly launch tower here and everything. It looks much better. So that's kind of what we have going on here. Now we can go to the Space Center again, and we will start designing and building a rocket. All we are going to do right now is a very, very basic rocket. We're just going to launch a satellite into orbit so you guys can kind of see what happens in this game. And then we will continue in later episodes doing more complicated missions. I'm going to try as much as I can to explain the physics behind everything here. I'm a student of physics, so but I'm going to try to avoid too many equations and too much math because I know a lot of people don't like that. If anyone's interested in it, of course, there are great tutorials that include that stuff, or anyone is welcome to message me and I would, post a comment, and I would be happy to do some videos that go into the mathematics. But for the time being, we're just going to kind of eyeball everything. So here we go, we're in here, we're going to start a new rocket. And we're just going to go ahead and launch a satellite into orbit. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to pick this pod to start off. It's called the Sputnik Mark 1. Looks kind of like Sputnik. Put it up here, and then we have to just build a rocket around it. So I'm going to go next to structural. We're going to put this little adapter here. Before we do that, actually, let's go to utility, find this little battery, the Z200. Just put it under there. Everything snaps together. It's like Lego pieces. You can easily design and build rockets however you want. And, so we'll put that adapter. Under that, we're going to put a small fuel tank. So we'll go to, if you see these tabs over here, these are all of our parts. So you have pods, you have propulsion, control, structural, aerodynamic, utility, science, and sub-assemblies, which we'll avoid some sub-assemblies for the moment. You'll see those in a later episode. So for the moment, we are, of course, in propulsion. In propulsion, we're going to find this little mini fuel tank, the FLT 100. Put that down there. And go back a page. As you can see, you can scroll through the pages here on parts. And find this little tiny engine here, the Rockamax 48-7S, and throw that on the bottom. So that will be more or less our satellite, but we're going to do a couple of other things to it. We need to go to utility and put some solar panels on it, because if it runs out of power, we can't fly it anymore because it's a probe. So we have a few choices in solar panels, and it really doesn't matter. This guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. They each have their advantages and disadvantages, and sometimes it's just about looks. You also have big solar panels, like for space stations and large probes. This guy, we're not going to use that. So you can pick any of these 5. I'm just going to go ahead and pick this guy. Doesn't really matter. If you click down here, you have symmetry modes. So click on it, and now you see we have 2 symmetries. So if I click on him and put him here on the side, you'll see it automatically symmetrically put me another one on the other side, which is convenient because when things are not symmetrical, your rockets will not fly straight and you will not be a happy person. So now that we have that, that is our satellite that we're going to launch into orbit. So now we need to build a rocket that will launch it into orbit. In order to do so, we're going to go ahead under this. We need to put a decoupler. Now we have a few different options of decouplers. Again, they are all different, and you'll play around with some of these and kind of understand, but we're just going to start with this little guy, the TR2V stack decoupler. So you just put that down there. What the decouplers do, they allow you to drop stages. So now wherever there's a decoupler, as you see on the right-hand side here, this is our staging. So it goes from the bottom up. So as of right now, if I hit space bar, which does staging, after I go to launching, obviously, the first thing that's going to happen is this decoupler is going to fire and separate everything that's below it, which isn't here yet. And then next time I hit space bar, it's going to activate this engine that will be the main engine for our satellite. Now, to put our rocket underneath it, we need to put an upper stage. We're going to use a relatively small 2-stage rocket to put this into orbit. So we're going to put another fuel tank down here underneath the decoupler. We're going to pick this one, the FLT 200 fuel tank. So that will go there, and then we'll go back to this page, and we're going to put on the LV 909 liquid fuel engine. So this is going to be our upper stage that's going to kind of complete our orbit. And then we'll go back to structural again. Put on this decoupler, the TR18A stack decoupler. So that will go down below that. And below that, now we need to build our booster. So we're going to do a pretty simple booster here. We're just going to find this fuel tank here, the FLT 800. We're going to put one. We're going to put two of them. And then go back again to this page. And we're going to put on what's called the LVT45 engine. Now you see here we have the LVT30 and the LVT45. They're very similar, but the LVT30 weighs a little bit less and has a little bit more thrust, but the LVT45 has what's called thrust vectoring, which means that the engine nozzle can actually turn to help you control the spacecraft. We want that because it will make life much easier for us. So now we have this basic rocket. Just going to kind of lower them down a little bit. If you want to move the whole rocket, you either need to select the root part, which is the first part you put down, in this case the probe, or you can hit Shift and click anywhere on the rocket and then move it. So here we go, and then we're going to just go to structural, and you'll find these guys, the TT18A Launch Stability Enhancer. You don't actually always need these, but I like to put them because I can. So you can put whatever symmetry you want. In this case, we're just going to still use this 2 symmetry, and you put it, and that's just going to hold the rocket until you launch. Now, before we go to launch, we can name this guy, so we're going to call it Tutorial Orbit. You know, because I'm very clever with names. And we just, before we go to launch, need to check that our staging here on the right is correct. So the first time that we hit the stage button, we can see here it's going to be starting from the bottom. So what's going to happen, this engine is going to ignite. If I highlight it, you see the engine highlights, which is good. And the launch clamps are going to open. That's good. You want that to happen. Sometimes you really need to check this stuff because the game doesn't always do it correctly automatically. Sometimes the engine will fire and the launch clamps won't open, so the engine will fire and it'll just sit there. So after that happens, when this runs out of fuel, we're going to hit spacebar again, which is going to then do this stage. As you can see, it's going to drop that. All of that's going to drop, and then again, we're going to light this engine, which will then burn. And once that engine runs out of fuel, we hit spacebar again. This decoupler will fire, drop all of that, then we'll fire this engine, and that will be this entire rocket. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go to launch. We're going to clear the launch pad and proceed. So here we are on the launch pad. So go ahead and get started. The first thing we are going to do, we're going to hit T. T activates what's called SAS. You see on the bottom here, this is our navigation ball. The nav ball, we call it. It basically is what you need the most. It will give you all of the information you need in order to fly this spacecraft. And as you see the SAS, when I hit T, it cycles that thing called SAS off and on. When it's on, that's a stability enhancer, and that is just basically using a flight computer to help keep your flight straight. So we're going to keep that on almost all the time. We're going to throttle up, which throttle up is shift. As you can see on the left-hand side of the nav ball, we have the throttle going up and down. So we're going to put that all the way up. And once that's up, we can go ahead and hit spacebar, which will launch the rocket in 3, 2, 1, lift off. And off we go. As you can see, the rocket starts launching straight up. As a general rule, you want to just let it go straight up at the beginning. This will go up to about, we're going to eventually need to turn. Anyone who knows anything about space or rocket science or any of this stuff knows that getting into orbit, going to space, is not about going straight up. It's actually about going sideways, because orbit works by traveling fast enough sideways that when you fall due to the gravity of the Earth or whatever body you are orbiting, you are actually falling around the curvature of the planet. So we are going to have to turn over sideways, but at the beginning, we want to go straight up because the lower parts of the atmosphere are very thick and you waste fuel pushing through them, so you want to get out of them as quickly as possible. So we're just going to fly straight up until we get to about 10 kilometers high. As you can see on the top of our page here, we have some more indicators. This is our altitude indicator. This is altitude above sea level. This is very important because when you're landing, it will not necessarily be at sea level. So you need to always keep that in mind. In addition, you see up here underneath that you have the atmosphere indicator. So it goes from the right to the left, right being you're in the thickest atmosphere, and you see the colors change as the atmosphere gets thinner. So now we're up at 2,000 meters, 2,100 meters, which is 2 kilometers basically. Once we get up to 10, we're going to turn. As a general rule, when we turn, we want to turn to the east. East on your navigation ball, you will see, is labeled by the number 90, which is standard, you know, in any navigation type thing. So we want to do that because that is the direction of the rotation of the planet. So you're actually getting free energy that you're getting from the planet's motion. So that's the best way to do it. You can, of course, launch in other directions, but then you need more fuel. So we're going to do the standard equatorial orbit here. This is what's called prograde because it is going with the planet, pro. Retrograde would be if you went the opposite direction. And these terms are very important. We're going to use them a lot in various contexts. So in further videos, you will hear me use them a lot. And on the nav ball, you see, while we're going up, I'll explain some of these things. So this little VW type looking thing, that is, where is your rocket pointed? Underneath that, you will see this little yellow circle kind of thing. That is what direction is your rocket actually flying. That's very important. There's another one that we can't see right now. It looks like that, but it has an X in it. And that is the opposite of what direction you're actually flying. So the direction you're flying is prograde. The opposite direction is called retrograde. And as you are going up, you see we are pointed directly where we're flying. Once we start turning, that is going to change. Additionally, we have our velocity indicator here. This is right now our velocity compared to the surface. Eventually that's going to change into what's called orbital velocity, which is basically your velocity compared to the planet. So as of right now, though, we're up at about 9 kilometers. So in a second, we're going to start our gravity turn. The way that works, we're going to turn, here we go, we're there. So the WASD keys, W-A-S-D, control the rocket. So we want to hit D, which is going to push us over. As you can see, the rocket is turning. And if you watch the nav ball, you see that it is turning towards the 90 degrees. And we want to put it at about a 45-degree angle, which is actually going to be right on the number 90 here. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. And now, on this particular rocket, we are going to just keep flying it like this until this stage runs out of fuel. This is actually not the most efficient way to get into orbit, but it's kind of the simplest, most intuitive way. You will see later that you can actually do a more gradual gravity turn, which is what real rockets do. But you really have to understand all of the different numbers and thrust-to-weight ratios and everything like this in order to do that effectively without accidentally crashing. So at the time being, we're just going to keep going like that. And once this stage runs out of fuel, we're going to cut the engines, drop that stage, and I will show you how to complete the orbit. Should be a few more moments. As we can see on the left here, we have the stages, and it's showing us how much fuel is left. There, you will also be able to tell without that because the engine will stop firing when it runs out of fuel. So just keep on going. A few more moments and we should be ready for our stage separation. Before we separate the stage, we're actually going to hit X. Why? Because X automatically cuts the engines instead of having to throttle down using control all the way down to 0. So it's actually very convenient to just cut the engines with X, and that's about it. So here we go in 3, 2, 1. Okay, well I was off a little bit, but we're about to run out of fuel. And there we go. So I'm going to hit X. hit spacebar. As you can see, that drops that stage. Hit it again, which is going to activate this next engine, but we're not going to fire it yet. We're going to hit M. That brings us out. This is our map view. And what you want to do is go put your mouse over this thing, the AP, it's apoapsis. That's the highest point in your trajectory. It's 64. So we need to throttle back up. You want to pull up the nav ball from down here, because you can't throttle without it. You need this to get above 70, because that's where the atmosphere ends in this game, actually 69, but just for kicks, we're going to bring it up to 100 right now. So as you can see, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. So now, we're just going to let our spacecraft coast up until it's 100 kilometers up. And we're going to fly most of the rest of this mission from the nav ball, but one thing you need to do, you don't want to do this till you're above like 60 so the atmosphere doesn't tear them off, but you'll need to right click on the solar panels and click extend panels. Because if not, you will run out of power and then your spacecraft will die and it will just be dead in the air. So you don't want that. And as you see, the solar panels extend here. And we are about to arrive in space. As of right now, though, we are going to get to space, and as you can see from our trajectory, we are here, and we're going to go up, reach 100 kilometers, and then start falling back down towards the planet. That is not what we want. We want the satellite to stay in orbit. So now, once you're up above the atmosphere, you can actually do what's called time warp. On the top left of the screen, you see that we have these things, and it's speeding up time, so I just want to do this until we get up to that AP, to the apoapsis. And here we go. And once you're there, you want to turn towards this prograde marker. Again, that's the yellow circle on your nav ball. You want your spacecraft facing towards that, and once it is, go ahead and fire up your throttle. We're actually a little bit late, but it's okay. And as you see, as we fire up the throttle, our trajectory is getting wider. So eventually, we want to keep doing this until the trajectory gets wide enough that it goes all the way around the planet and will come back around on itself. And this is how real satellites work. So this is not actually going to be a great orbit because I was a little bit late. As you can see, it's we're already past the apoapsis, but as long as we don't fall back into the atmosphere, we're okay. We don't need the orbit to be a real circular orbit. Later on, we'll go into that stuff, but right now we're just going for basics. So as you see, now there's a periapsis that comes out, which is the lowest point, and once that's above 70, hit X, cut your engines, and we are now in orbit around the planet. So what will happen is, you see, if I go ahead and speed up time, he's just going to keep going around and around forever. There's nothing that he will never fall back down unless you change his course. So that's it. That is how you launch something into orbit, and that is actually how you launch something into orbit in real life as well. So thanks guys for watching. I hope this was educational and interesting. We will be having some more videos in the near future. Have a good one. Bye.